Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ashley Appling. I'm the Horticulture Extension Agent in the Culpeper County Extension Office. I serve Culpeper, Madison, and Orange counties. So depending where you're at, I hope you're having a good day. It is actually looking like it's not a heavy rain, but it is raining here. If you're just joined us a second ago, the link on the screen right this second appears to not be working right now. I did receive a comment in the chat box that it was working an hour ago. So I will look into that and see why it's asking y'all for a password. It might just be an error on Virginia Tech's side. It shouldn't be asking for a password. This, of course, is our part 2 of the woody plant identification. So we will be talking about going into finishing off our acronym we learned last class. And maybe I don't think I explained it quite thoroughly enough, so I'll explain the why we're using that acronym also. And then we'll get into different other ID features on the stem and on the branches, a little bit into bark, just to see what, just to show you all some of the most common types of what bark might look like when you're out and about. I tried to put the link to the recording in the chat box, but it still wasn't working right this second. So I will definitely try to send that at the end of the class. I apologize for that. But like I was saying, we're going to talk about bark a little bit, and then we'll get into vines. So we'll talk about some common native vines, and that will be the end of the class today. So again, this is an introductory course, just like last week's was. So we're just finishing it off. We started very broad last week. We talked a lot about the plant in the upper left-hand picture on this introductory slide. So if you did not remember what that was from last week, or if you're just joining us for the first time, that is a Franklinia altimaha, or Franklin tree. Does grow, it is a native to the southeastern United States. And it blooms, I think it just finished blooming. I took this picture in my backyard, so it just finished blooming probably about a couple weeks ago. But it bloomed from late July all through August and into early September. And it has these flowers, not much else flowers like this in late summer, so it's pretty rare. One of my favorites, and it was named for Benjamin Franklin, so that's, as you can guess, that's why it's called Franklin tree. Found in Georgia though, so I always like telling that story. That's where we were last week, talking about classification, scientific names a little bit. Good introduction all around. And if you are just now joining us for this week's class, this series is usually an outdoor-led class. I walk around outside at James Madison's Montpelier. It's actually Montpelier Station in Orange County, Virginia. And Somerset would be the other closest little city area. But it's a nice little walk, and we walk around and look at all the historic trees on the property and talk about those. And it's actually a 3-part series. So we go 3 consecutive Fridays looking at all the different trees, walking in the woods. Right now we would have been looking at a lot of different, the back trails behind the house are very nice. A lot of pawpaw trees, if you haven't seen those before, definitely if you can go down there for that visit, go ahead and do it. It's very amazing. Pawpaw is a very tropical looking plant. And it does produce an edible fruit if you're not familiar with it. It's a very, very nice. It has, some people say it has a banana taffy kind of flavor. And other people say banana custard. So it does have a little bit of banana flavor to it. Very nice fruit. Doesn't ship well though, so that's why it's not in mass production. I did not mention that looks like most of y'all have already caught on, but you can put any questions you want in the chat box and I will look at those at the end of the presentation today because it's kind of distracting on my end to keep track of that and do the class at the same time. So all questions will be answered at the end. And let's get going. Let's see. Let me hide this. So it gets out of my way. Okay, so let's get going. So we're going to start with a little review from part 1. We were talking about, in the part 1 class last Thursday night, we are talking about the acronym, the opposites acronym, and opposite referred to the opposite bud arrangement, or if you prefer using the word node, the different nodes on the stems. So they are placed directly opposite of each other on the stem. So you look on one side of the stem, there's a bud, you look on the other side of the stem, there's a bud, and they're directly opposite. And the reason we have an acronym for those is that in the ornamental world, at least, there are not a lot of plants that have oppositely arranged buds on the stems. And of course, the leaves are attached to those buds. So you can use the word oppositely attached leaves, and that is fine. And that is the reason we use this acronym, is because there's not a lot of them. Mad Buck and Vibrant Cat. So we went through the Mad Buck and Vibrant part. M stands for, actually I have it on this slide, so let's just bring it up. So M stands for maple. Ace or ACE is the family that maple is part of. As you can tell, it's probably mostly maples because it has Acer at the beginning, and Acer is the genus name for maple. A stands for ash, which is in the Oleaceae family. And if you're familiar with olives, the olive tree we get olive oil from is in the same family with the ash tree. Green ash is probably the most common on the east coast of the United States. Unfortunately, in Virginia, and depending on where you're at, the emerald ash borer it's an insect pest, has become a very bad problem on ash trees. It kills them outright within a fairly short period of time, 5-10 years in some cases. So ashes are not quite as popular as they used to be, especially out in the woods. People like seeing them, but what I mean is that they're not as common, I should say. So the A part of this stands for ash, and the members of the Oleaceae family do have oppositely arranged buds also. So the D stands for dogwood, and that's Cornaceae. So that's our native eastern flowering dogwood. Cornus florida. Cornus kousa is also very popular. There's tons of different dogwoods. Dogwoods are very, very beautiful trees. So the D stands for dogwood. And just keep in mind all of these plant families and groups. They do have the thing they have in common is that their buds are oppositely arranged along the stems. The buck part stands for buckeye, which is Hippocastanaceae. And if you're familiar with the horse chestnuts, they are in the same family. So buckeye is what we call them in North America and them in the United States. And horse chestnut is what they call the European species of Hippocastanaceae. So our buckeye, the seeds are actually pretty large and they look like a buck's eye, or in a deer, of course. So that is what they're named after. They're very dark brown. And if you have any around your property, or if you planted one yourself, they are definitely making seeds and they're dropping right now. I have a red buckeye in my front yard and it is full of seeds this year. So you will definitely find it if you look in the right places. They are poisonous to people though, even though deer and other types of animals do eat them. And there's also a confectionery, a little sugary, I'm not sure if it's chocolate flavored, but up in Ohio, they do make buckeye desserts. So if you're familiar with that, that's why they look like the little nuts, because they originated from a real nut in the wild, or at least they look like them, I should say. The vibe part, the VIB part, is viburnum, and that's Caprifoliaceae. And the honeysuckle is probably one of the most other common family members you've noticed. And all viburnums are also oppositely arranged buds, leaves, And the honeysuckles are too. So if you have any wild honeysuckles growing on your fence, walk out there. Maybe a little bit drier weather, but walk out there and then you'll notice that the buds are arranged opposite of each other and the leaves also are. So then you know it's a honeysuckle. Or you're at least you're going down the right path of knowing it's a honeysuckle. And the cat part is catalpa. There are 2 native species to North America. They're both native to the east coast of the United States. And there's a northern species, which is called northern catalpa, and then there's a southern catalpa. And here in Virginia, we are kind of in the transition zone between the 2 species. So we'll have we finished up through viburnum last Thursday night. And so we're going to start on the next slide with catalpa and then get into the other topics I mentioned in the introduction. So let's go look at some pictures instead of just some words. Excuse me. That was just a little box to say that's where we're starting at. So Bignoniaceae, catalpa, there's 3 species. One is tropical, and the other 2 are in North America. And then jacaranda, I'm not sure how many of y'all are, I probably pronounced that a little bit differently than they do. I probably butchered it. You're probably not even supposed to pronounce the J. But it's a tree common in Brazil, South Florida. They have it planted, any tropical kind of climate. Very bright purple flowers, very vibrant. It's a pretty tree in its own regard, and it's in the same family. But you'll notice the catalpas are very, very pretty. So let's bring up a picture of those. Oh, a little more anticipation. I don't have the pictures up yet. But northern catalpa, Catalpa speciosa, it's a large tree. It's larger than its southern counterpart, 40 to 60 feet high, about 20 to 40 feet wide. This information about the dimensions and the seed pod length and everything like that comes from Dr. Durr's Woody Plant Manual. So we talked about that book a little bit in the first class, and that's where that information is coming from. Dr. Michael Durr, if you wanted to look it up on Amazon, you can still buy that book. And it is humongous. It is actually underneath my computer right now, so that the computer can be at eye level with me. But it's a huge book, so you can see it can be multiple uses. It can be used for that also. So, but it's a very large tree. Getting back to the catalpa, it does have thinner leaves than its southern counterpart. They're a little bit longer, pointed on the end of the leaf. So the leaf's about 12 inches long. And it's a simple leaf, so it's not compound. And we talked about what simple and compound were in part 1 of the class. Seed pods are 12 to 22 inches long, so they look like long bean pods. So you can just imagine 22 inches long is pretty good. And flowers are typically white, May into June. Southern catalpa, Catalpa bignonides. Is a smaller tree, 30 to 40 feet high and wide with more blossoms. So not the course plants like Dr. Durr always likes to say, don't always read the books. So sometimes it might have less flowers than it says in the book. I always love that quote, that plants don't read the book. So, and that is absolutely true. So not all, sometimes these don't hold totally true to form. But leaves, oh no, I got a sneak peek. Leaves are 10 inches long and about 6 inches wide. Seed pods are 15 inches or about their halves. And the flowers are white with purple and yellow markings or splotches. It's pretty interesting to see. And around our part of Virginia, near Culpeper, there's a lot of little towns. There's a little town called Catalpa. There's a road named after it. Towards the colonial period and a little bit after, it was a very, very widely planted tree, I believe. Even nowadays, some of the historic homes have large catalpas in the front yard. So it's not unheard of for back then. Here's some bark textures of the northern catalpa and the southern catalpa. I think we're slowing down on participation, so let me hide this. Okay, so we have northern catalpa on the left-hand side. I have not said exactly how what these bark terms are yet, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more. But this is more commonly what would be considered ridge and furrows. So the higher raised parts are the ridges, and the furrows are what look like little valleys. And we're going to go in much more detail about that in a little bit towards the end of the presentation. And southern catalpa still has its ridges. The furrows are deeper, not flaking. We'll have some pictures about flaking bark, but you can see there's a difference. These pictures are not the same size, but you can just imagine the trunks are very wide, and you'll see these bark textures when you're walking up on or standing underneath the tree. And we'll talk about textures coming up, so don't worry about that. Here's the northern catalpa in all its glory right here. So this is absolutely picture perfect. There is a caterpillar butterfly species that eats catalpa. If you remember what it is, I cannot off the top of my head. If you remember what it is, please put it in the chat box. But it can pretty much, it's a native caterpillar, but it can pretty much devastate catalpas towards the end of summer. So that is one reason people don't like them quite as much as they used to, I believe. But that's just speculation on my part. But you can see this tree in its full glory when it's truly growing nicely. And this is a native, if I hadn't mentioned this already. I think I did a couple times, but just to reinforce that. Very pretty tree, as you can see from the pictures. Here's southern catalpa. It's usually a little bit wider than it is tall. And this was the best picture I could find for the splotches that we mentioned in that on that one slide. So very, very pretty. Not a lot of difference. We're kind of in the transition zone, so you're going to see both if you're going around to probably more historic homes. Unfortunately, catalpa is not found in the nursery trade very often. So, but you'll find them definitely in the wild. Southern catalpa probably a little bit more towards Williamsburg and then the Virginia Beach area. And then of course, I think this picture said it was from South Carolina. So the one I'm using on this slide right this second. So definitely further south, you'll see the southern catalpa in its full glory. Some people describe this as having a little bit of a purplish haze in the white, but I don't quite, probably just the lighting at my house right now, because sometimes I see it and sometimes I don't. So very pretty trees. So a little bit about leaf shapes. Of course, last presentation, we talked about bud arrangement, opposite or alternate. We talked about all kinds of details like that, but then a little bit about the leaves. So this picture right here comes from Dr. Durr's Woody Plant Manual. So these are the names that you might, if you're in an identification book or something like that, or even Virginia's Native Plant Tree Manual, which you can get through the Virginia Department of Forestry. You can get it online also. So the Virginia Department of Forestry website, you can visit there and find their tree manual, native tree manual. And they'll use these terms when you're using the key at the beginning to try to identify your tree. So starting left to right at the top, we have a linear. You see it's very, very skinny. This would be more like a weeping willow, I would say. Oblong, a little bit fatter, but still kind of narrow. Longer than it is wide. Lanceolate means it comes to a tip and more rounded towards the petiole. Ovate, which is a lot of plants have ovate leaves. You see it's pretty much oval kind of shape with a point at the end. Oblanceolate is just basically flip-flopped. So we see lanceolate here, and oblanceolate is flip-flopped. So the point's more towards the petiole, and the rounded part is at the tip of the leaf. Obovate, it's fatter, I guess you could say, than oblanceolate. So it's still the pointed area of the leaf is still towards the petiole. It's a little bit wider and still rounded at the tip. Cordate, very interesting leaf shape. More of kind of like a heart shape. Yeah, heart shaped would be a very good takeaway for this. And then reniform is fat heart shaped. I know these are not the exact definition terms, but I like describing it how I can understand it. So hopefully this is working for y'all. And then deltoid looks like a pyramid, basically. So I won't use these terms too much in this presentation today, but you'll see it if you're looking at a plant identification map, or if you buy some books online, or if you get the Virginia Native Tree. They actually also have a shrub book too. The Virginia Department of Forestry does. So you'll see these terms used if you're trying to identify a tree on your own. So this is just for your information. And if you get Dr. Durr's Woody Plant Manual, this sketch line drawing is from that manual. And like I said at last class, his wife drew all these. So all the pencil sketches throughout the book, his wife drew. So it's very, very interesting. And he says that in the acknowledgments at the beginning. So I just think it's amazing. Very good artwork in this book. This is also from Dr. Durr's book. So it's talking about leaf margins. Some of these leaf margins you don't see quite as often as others. Entire means it's completely smooth, or as smooth as a plant can be anyway, along the edge. So margins basically mean edge of the leaf. That's the way I've always thought about it. Ciliolate, there's little tiny hairs. Not hairs, but little tiny plant hairs, I used to say. It's not, of course, it's not made out of the same material as human hair or animal hair or anything, but it looks like it has tons of little hairs on the edge. Serrate looks like a little saw blade. So it looks like saw teeth along the edge. Crenate, the saw teeth are rounded. So that's a good way of looking at that. Sinuate are sinuses, basically. And oak leaves and maple leaves have much deeper sinuses, which are easier to see, but it's a leaf with a sinus. So the sinus is the indention, or the little rounded part into the leaf towards the midvein. Lacerate looks a little bit more jagged. There's still little, sinuses aren't deep, it's just more jagged, ragged along the edge. Dentate, the teeth, you see the serrate, the teeth kind of go upward in upward motion, kind of like a saw blade. Dentate are more pyramid, kind of triangular shaped, and not in that upward sweeping motion. Undulate, more wavy along the margin. Pectinate, very deep indentions along the margin, as you can see towards the midrib. And then some of these terms right here you don't see very often. So yeah, I don't really talk about that very often. The most of the time you'll see the words entire thrown around when you're looking up a plant, tree, or shrub. Serrate will pop up a lot. Sometimes lacerate will. Those are the more common terms that you'll see. Leaf apexes, Dr. Durr will describe it sometimes as a tip like this with his aerostat. Attenuate is basically like a very nice point. Acuminate. If you came to see me butcher some of these names, here we go here. So you'd see it's more gradual point, and then acute, and then rounded. Leaf bases, you'll see those terms thrown around sometimes. Attenuate, you see it comes down to a point on the petiole. Cordate, more rounded towards the petiole and goes up. Cunate is a more defined sharp top of a pyramid, upside down pyramid. And then we have a correlate right here. So he goes into more detail than I just did. And of course, this, like I said before, this drawing also is from Dr. Durr's book. Fruit types, I like throwing this in here too. It's very interesting in my opinion. Number one is a achene of a sycamore. So if you have a sycamore tree in your yard, most of the time you see those big balls, they're kind of brown, very prickly kind of looking, and it's a ball when it falls. But if you pulled off the actual seed, this akene here, this is the actual seed, this little part right here. So those balls, as you can imagine, have tons of these seeds. And then number 2 is also an akene. Of course, that is a maple seed right here. Number 3 is an elm akene. And number 4 is listed as an ash akene. So these top number 1 through 4 are all akenes. They have these little kind of helicopter little wing kind of part that helps them fall. So it's very interesting. If we skip down to number 5, acorn, of course, I know most of y'all are probably familiar with that. That comes from oaks, of course, and that's a nut, and that's an acorn there. This nut in this example here, this is a true nut. This is a hickory nut, and hickories and pecans are true nuts. So that's what they have, the outer coating that comes off, and the nuts inside, of course. Number 7 is a legume. And it's saying this one comes from a black locust, if you read the description at the bottom. And legumes are in the same, beans, the beans we eat, are in the same exact family as these trees. Redbud would also be a legume. A capsule, so a true capsule, would be number 8 here, which is from a poplar tree. So poplars have capsule-like seeds. A palm is, apples have palms, roses do too. Roses and apples are related, and roses also have palms, so they have seeds like that. A drupe or true drupes are cherries and peaches and plums. They have that hard seed in the middle, and that is what we call drupes. Very interestingly enough, we call blackberries and raspberries berries, but they are actually in the same family. They're related to peaches and other types of plants, and they're actually drupes. They're a collection of drupes. So there's a seed in each of those little flavor bombs, as you can say, I guess. And they're actually fruit. If you're talking about fruit classifications, they're actually drupes. They're not berries. And true berries are fruits like persimmon, which is number 11 right here. Of course, a persimmon in full color would be orange on the outside, very bright orange, and most of them look like a little tomato. And they have seeds on the inside, and this is what we would call, or what taxonomists and botanists would call a true berry. I will provide this presentation. Just to email me. I usually only send it out as a PDF, as one slide at a time. But if y'all are interested in printable version, I can send that to you. But this is for your information, and I always think it's very interesting. Acorns. So we have white oak, Quercus alba. That is our native white oak to the eastern United States. Pretty large acorns, they're green. And then if we're contrasting that with, this is southern red oak here, Quercus falcata. The northern red oak is what we find commonly in Virginia too, in our part of Virginia. Quercus falcata has more of a falconate, they call it a falconate leaf. So it has a large lobe at the bottom here. Looks like a wing, kind of swept back like this. The southern red oak you can find it around here. I used to have one before the power company cut it down. It's gone now, unfortunately, but you can find them around here every once in a while, and you'll see the acorns a little bit smaller in comparison to the white oak. Interesting stories about these, in squirrel behavior anyway. Squirrels prefer the white oaks in the fall because they don't have very many tannins in them. And that's also a reason you'll see the white oak seedlings actually sprout in the fall, and then they overwinter as seedlings. So they don't have a lot of tannins. Those are the first that squirrels usually eat. And then the acorns of the red oaks in the northern, or the red oaks in the black oak family have more tannins in there. It's a little bit more, squirrels just don't want to eat it. It's a bad taste. So those are the acorns that they'll plant. And of course, over the winter time, the cold, the freeze and thaw process, the acorn kind of Tannins break down over time, temperature related, of course, too. And then the squirrels sometimes find them, and then sometimes they don't. So the red oak and the black oak family, you don't commonly see those sprout in the fall. They'll sprout in the springtime. And when I first heard that story, I just thought it was amazing that someone figured that out. Um, but yeah, that's just really awesome. If you have white oaks around your house, it doesn't have to be just our native white oak. It could be a willow oak, which has more of a skinny linear leaf. Anything that's in the white oak family will have that tendency to sprout in the fall after they fall off the tree. So just keep an eye on that. Samaras, of course, red maple is on the left-hand side. You see the wings kind of go more downward. So they're in a downward facing position. And then Norway maple, which is Acer platanoides, the wings kind of go outward sweep. And Samaras are also larger on Norway maple than they are compared to red maple. So I just like to put in these pictures up here as a good comparison between the two. It's even different color and different arrangement of the wings. It's very interesting. Here's that sycamore ball we were talking about earlier. And this, of course, is an Akene also. So just like we were talking about with the maples, they're in the same classification of fruit type. So this whole ball will fall off. And we saw on the pencil drawing this one little seed here, a tiny little seed. That's the seed of the ball. So you have probably 100 to maybe 1,000 seeds on each ball. So there's a lot falling off. And I don't know how many of y'all have seen the plant on the right-hand side of the slide. This is the Osage orange, and that is a drupe. So we are talking about peaches and plums being drupes and blackberries being drupes. And this is also a drupe. This green structure you're seeing here is the size of a softball, actually, though. So it is humongous. And it is made up of lots of drupes. So this is not, you don't plant that whole ball. There is a process you can go through online to break that apart, and you have lots and lots of seeds in this ball. It's one of those plants they call anachronisms. So plants out of time is the most basic definition for that word. And it also means that they're, through theories and research, archaeologists have figured out that they believe that the animal that helped spread these fruits is no longer with us. So a lot of folks believe that the wild horse species, before they went extinct in North America, spread this fruit, along with the giant sloths and the woolly mammoths, spread this fruit, because this fruit is very large. Horses do like them today, and they've also done experiments feeding them to African elephants, and African elephants will eat it also. So it's really interesting research when you start looking that up. And it's called an anachronism. So I read an article recently about avocado, and avocado is also considered an anachronous fruit because they believe a lot of the large mammals that help spread avocados have gone extinct, so like the giant sloths again. And it was fortunate enough to find a creature that loves it and humans just as much as those animals did. And I read, I forget what, there was a recent newspaper article about this, recent news article. And they're saying through breeding programs, plant breeding, we've actually increased the amount of flesh around the seed. The native species has a large seed in the middle with not a lot of flesh around it in avocado. And we have gone the opposite way with it. And it is also called an anachronous fruit because its pollinator is not, or it's not pollinator, but its animal companion is not around anymore. But it found a new one in us, just like Osage orange did. It was found in Oklahoma, I believe, Texas area, border area, and the Native Americans used it. It was very common in colonial times and a little bit afterwards as a living fence. So very common, very nice orange, orange wood when you cut into it, and can be used to make furniture and stuff like that. So a lot of cool information if you've never looked up this fruit before. Very, very large fruit though, and it's dangerous to walk under because, like I said, it's the size of a softball. So as you can imagine, it has about the same weight too. So watch out if you, and we do walk by one of these. They have female and male trees, and we see both of them at James Madison's Montpelier when we do that class, and they would be in fruit right now too. So if you see one out in the woods or out in the wild, they would be in fruit right now if you found one. Very interesting, I think. So a little bit about tree shapes, so we aren't going into this too much. But pendulent, branches are pendulent, that would be like a willow. So on the left-hand side of this slide. And ascending branches, if you want to think about it, are more like how an oak grows or a maple grows. Basically weeping, weeping willow, as we can say, are more pendulent. Weeping cherries would be in that. Anything that goes up and then they gradually fall over. And then most trees have more of an ascending branch style. And that's basically all I'm going to say about this. Tree shapes are so varied, so different, but most of them fall in these two categories in some way or some kind of shape. And I know there's lots more information y'all can find online if you want to learn more or in books. So this isn't the most interesting pencil sketch slides. That's why I don't spend too much time on it. We got a lot more interesting things coming up in a few minutes. A little bit more branching horizontally, that'd be more like bald cypress, and then branches spreading would be more like our native American elm, which unfortunately you can't find very often anymore. Mostly because of the Dutch elm disease. At the turn of the last century actually spread very quickly to the elms. And yeah, so this is just more tree shapes, just for your info. Stems and buds, so this gets more interesting here. So parts of a stem, of course, we have buds. Their scales, size, and arrangement you can use for identification. Leaf scars can be used for identification, so you could use shape, size, lack thereof, or visual vascular bundle scars. So some trees, bushes have them and some do not. So we'll point out on the next slide where to look for those at. Stipulal scars, presence, or size, if it's still in leaf. Stipule is basically just small little leaves at the base of the petiole. So we'll get to see a little bit more in a second on a picture. Lentisols are black cherries, and the different cherries show lentisols very, very well. They're white dots up and down the stem or the trunk of the tree. And scientists have theorized it's for air circulation. So you see these white dots all up and down. And we'll get to see that. And I have a picture of that coming up too. So here we have our stem and bud terminology little diagram. So terminal bud would be at the tip. Because you can see up, so right here. So if you read this sideways and turn your head, number one is a butternut, which would be closely related to black walnut and other types of walnuts. And then slippery elm is the number two on the top side. So this is a butternut down here, and butternuts are tasty. Some people really like them. Pseudo-terminal bud, so you see it's kind of off-center. There's a leaf scar here. You can actually see these little dots, and that's the vascular bundle scars. So some species you can see that and some of you can't. So terminal bud right on the tip, and pseudo-terminal bud is kind of offset right where a leaf was the previous growing season. So lateral buds are further down. This is where branches have the potential from growing from. So if you cut off these terminal buds, if you cut them off, pruning them off, by pruning them off or some other technique, the lateral buds directly below will grow out and you'll have new branches. And as you can see on this elm, it has an alternate leaf arrangement because there's not a bud directly across from it. Same with the butternut. The buds are not directly opposite, so it's an alternate arrangement. Bud scales, that's a protective coating around the bud. That name's pretty evident for what it is. Leaf scars, so I mentioned that a little bit already. We looked on the slippery elm, it's those little dots. A little bit, they're more kind of concentrated, I guess you could say, at the base of the leaf scar right here. So these little vascular bundles. Not all, it won't be evident on all species, but some of them they are, like these two examples here. Bud scar, I've already mentioned that a couple times. Stipule scar, so basically those are modified little leaves at the base. They don't really ever grow into a full-size leaf, some kind of appendage. And sometimes there's even thorns here, so in that category. So something at the base where the bud is at. And most of the time, like on roses, it's a little leaf at the base here. Then the lentil soles on this butternut, these little dots on the stem, all up and down. So like I said, cherries, all the cherry species show this very, very evidently because they usually have dark background color on their stems. So we'll see that in a few minutes. So that's the gas exchange organs, or at least that's the theory anyway. It's theorized that those are for gas exchange. Bud scale scars. So this is, just imagine everything where my cursor is and downward this direction is the previous season's growth, or 2 years ago's growth, I should say. This is the growth that occurred the summer before the leaves fell on this deciduous tree. So this is a winter image, and from the bud scale scar all the way this way is one season's growth. So this is not very evident on all tree species, as you can see on the butternuts right here. So everything below is older growth. This would be the previous season's growth. And the next year's or next summer's growth, in our case, if we're using next summer as the example, would be this direction. So this is where the bud scale scar would be through the next growing season. It'd be around here somewhere. Apple shows this very, very nicely. You can see the growth rate on apple by looking for the scale scars. And then the pith, it's either solid or it's chambered, as it is in some of the walnut family members, the juglin family members here. So in butternut, it is chambered if you cut into the branch. And that's used for identification also. And that is a stem and a bud terminology. So hopefully that didn't flow over your head too much. And like I said, I will be sharing this presentation, the slides with y'all and the recording. So you'll get to see this again for your own information. And now we're getting into bark. Bark is fun. We have lots and lots of pictures coming up. So a little terminology, there's ridges. These are the vertical parts, the raised parts. And they are divided by furrows, which you could imagine as the valleys in between. So they're uninterrupted in red oak, interlaced in white ash, so they make little diamond shapes all up and down the bark. And they're broken as in white oak. And like I said, the furrows are the vertical grooves, so kind of like the valleys between the ridges. So if we're looking at examples here, so white oak, they're broken horizontal ridges. So you can see they're not connected very well. The raised part is the ridge, and these little indention into the bark is what they call the furrow. So very much broken up in this white oak example. Northern red oak really shows the furrows nicely. So where my cursor is up and down, you can see the furrow pretty much unintersected all the way down in this picture. And then this indention, this valley, is the furrow right here going down. So that's what's in between the ridges. The little valley right here is the furrow. And you can see these are uninterrupted. Not always true, but you can see most of the ridges travel all the way down the tree. Very interesting, I think. Very interesting. Chestnut oak has very, very deep furrows, as you can see. Very, very interesting tree. Here's the ridge again, of course, right here. This little mountain-looking structure. And then this furrows right here, this valley, until you get to the next ridge. Chestnut oak shows this very dramatically, so that's why I picked this picture in this tree species. Very dramatic. Seeing that in the woods is always an amazing sight. And here's the diamond-shaped, the interlaced ridges we were talking about with white ash. As you can see here, yeah, that's a nice diamond right there. So here's a ridge, goes down like this, and there's a little diamond in the furrow in the middle, furrow right here, furrow, furrow, and the ridges are interlaced, kind of a diamond shape, down and up, all the way up and down the trees. Another here, ridge, ridge, furrow in between, little diamond shaped. And this is white ash, very, very dramatic. Bark surface textures are categorized into what they call fissures. So these are regular or irregular cracks and crevices, narrower than furrows. So we'll see that in the picture coming up. Smooth is completely flat. So we'll see our picture coming up for American beech, and beeches are very, very smooth. Beautiful, beautiful trees. American beech is my most favorite tree. I absolutely adore American beech. European beech too, though. I just love all the beech trees. Plates are large, distinctively circumcised portions of the bark. So that terminology probably doesn't mean anything to you, but we'll get to see it in a picture in a few seconds. So here's smooth. American beech, Fagus grandifolia. You can see so beautiful, so smooth here. I just love, unfortunately, people like to put graffiti on beech trees, but you can see it. You can rub your hand up there and it's smooth. Beeches, I just adore those trees. They are just so gorgeous. Shagbark hickory, this one is absolutely gorgeous too, in a different kind of way. So this would be what they consider plates on the bark. So you can see it kind of curls up on the edges, on the base of the bark, and it will flake off in long strips. And this is what they consider plates, the very large strips of bark that can come off, and they kind of curl, as you can see up here. Shagbark hickory is not the most common type of hickory in our part of Virginia. Pignut hickory is actually the more common type. But I just think shagbark's just gorgeous, just like the name implies. Bark surface textures can be peeling, so separating into relatively large, thin, or sometimes curling plates or sheets. Scale-like, so these are small, thin flaking plates, or flaking. So these look like thin slivers, chips, scales, or shavings falling off the tree, or actually on the tree too. So these pictures can be quite beautiful and dramatic also. So on river birch, that would be considered peeling bark. So you see these golden, nice tan flaking bark pieces coming off. It's just, yeah, even bark can be gorgeous. It almost takes my breath away looking at this. It's so beautiful. So this is what we consider peeling bark right here. Scale-like bark, black cherry. This is a native tree to Virginia. You can see it looks like little potato chips almost. Little scales, raised parts right here. Black cherry gets spread very, very readily by birds. So if you don't have one yet, you might soon. But black cherry has this scale-like bark. It's quite gorgeous too, I think, in its own way. And then flaking on a hop hornbeam is a very beautiful native tree that has flaking bark. So you can see this here. It's smaller than we saw with the dramatic shagbark hickory. It has smaller pieces, but they do a similar thing. They kind of curl up at the end, at the edges. And this is what they would consider flaking. Hop hornbeam, the seed pods on the hop hornbeam actually look like hops like we put in beer. They have this very similar look to it, and that's where it gets its name. And it's a native tree, as you can tell by the species name, Virginiana. So it was found in Virginia, or at least first found in Virginia, I should say. And sycamore has both. It has flaky and mottled bark. So you can see on the older bark, the more mature part of the trees are flaky barks. This is a very, very dramatic picture. You don't always see it this dramatically, but you can see the younger branches have mottled bark, and then the flaky bark is on the more mature parts of the tree. And that's just mottled. I think mottled is pretty in any direction. So this is very gorgeous, I think. Very nice contrast on this tree and trunk. So a couple other ones, horizontal lines. These are partially or completely raised lines that are often derived from lenticels. So we'll get to see a little bit about lenticels in the next couple slides. Shedding fibrous bark, they peel in long vertical, usually vertically frayed stripes. And then corky bark. Corky bark is very interesting. So let's just skip to the pictures real quick. It's really cool. So this is another native, our native choke cherry right here. And these are the lenticels. They've turned into horizontal lines at this point. The more immature, they'd be little white dots up and down. And these are more mature lenticels on this trunk. Choke cherries, another native little cherry, they get pretty big and birds love them. So you'll see them here and about around your yard. Our native eastern red cedar, Juniperus virginiana, which is actually a juniper. You can see these long strips falling off. It is a conifer, and this is what they would consider shedding fibrous bark right here. Quite dramatic. Some people consider them kind of trash trees, but I like red cedar. Red cedar is what they make the old cedar chests out of too, that you put your clothes into. Keeps moths away. And that's where it comes from. And the pencils too. Old pencils used to be made out of this also. And this is native all up the eastern seaboard of the United States. Very, very beautiful reddish bark, reddish wood as you would imagine from the cedar chests. And it has that smell. I think it has that smell around it too, even when it is growing. Corky bark would be what's on this hackberry right here. So you can see there's smooth parts of the tree separated by these raised kind of warty, kind of corky areas of the bark. And hackberry is found very commonly around Virginia. It's a native also. Seeds, the birds love it, so it is everywhere. So you will see it bounce up around here in lots of different places. Very interesting bark definition to it, I think. And then blocky would be what's considered would be on flowering dogwood. So you see this kind of alligator-like back to it. Some people call it that. There's raised ridges here, deep furrows, and they're kind of broken by these horizontal lines into this squarish shape. And this is what they would consider blocky. This is our eastern flowering dogwood. Cornus cusa actually has smooth bark, so completely different if you were wondering between the two. That's not the only distinction, but that is one distinction. A little bit about vines. We won't do this very long, and then we'll get into the questions. So poison ivy. So that's a very common native vine. So I wanted to throw that one in here real quick. It has alternate compound leaves. So we talked about what compound leaves were last time in part 1. So they're 7 to 10 inches long with 3 oval, large-toothed to wavy-edged leaflets. So if I use my cursor here, right here, this entire structure is the leaf of poison ivy. And the leaves of 3 that we talk about are actually 3 leaflets of 3. Leaflets of 3, let it be. Not as catchy as the other term, but this is a compound leaf, and it has 3 leaflets joined at a single point. So it would be considered more palmate, even in distinction. But this entire structure I'm circling my cursor around is the true leaf with 3 leaflets, which we identify poison ivy with. Virginia creeper, more commonly than not, has 5 leaflets, so that is one distinction. But they actually usually grow together, so it's hard to tell them apart, because even poison ivy can have 5 sometimes. So just beware of either one. Some people are even allergic to Virginia creeper also, so it's kind of hard to distinguish between the two sometimes. Dutchman's pipe, these are all going to be native vines. Dutchman's pipe is a very pretty native vine. Has alternate simple heart-shaped leaves, about 5 to 10 inches long. Margins are entire. So if you were wondering what entire meant earlier, they're completely smooth along the margin. So no serration, no nothing like that. Stems can be quite long and are often curved. So if you're walking along in the woods, you might see this vine here and there. And this is what Dutchman's pipe looks like in its description. A very pretty little vine, in my opinion. Trumpet creeper is I think there is an Asian species, but there is a native one also. And opposite pinnately compound leaves, 5 to 3 inches long, with 7 to 11 coarsely toothed leaflets, and often very shiny. So this picture is kind of in the distance, but this entire structure right here would be the leaf, of course, and then you can see the leaflets coming off the rachis, and this is a pinnately compound, oppositely budded tree, or opposite leaf arrangement also too. And trumpet creeper, very interesting. Hummingbirds like it. So if you were looking for a very, very aggressive vine though, we don't always consider native vines to be invasive, but this one could almost be categorized as that. You can see it's growing on top of a heavenly bamboo down here too, it looks like, an Andina. So they are trying to outcompete each other in this regard. Cross vine is a very, very pretty native vine also. Evergreen or nearly so. So it really depends on the winter. Opposite compound leaves with only 2 leaflets. And they the branch is branched with tendrils at the end, oval to lance-shaped leaves, 3 to 5 inches long. Edges are entire or smooth, whichever term you prefer. Dark green in summer, and they turn our bronze fiery red in the winter, which is very, very pretty. And you can see the flowers very, very pretty. I know Monticello, Tufton Farms, I know they sell this in their native tree plant collection sometimes. But it might be a little bit harder to find in other regards if you're looking for this native vine. But cross vine is very pretty, very, very nice vine. Carolina jessamine, and you could say jessamine, it's not jasmine. It's the native actually to a little bit further south, South Carolina and Georgia, as the common name would have referred to. It is an evergreen in most regards. Sometimes it'll lose its leaves. Opposite leaf arrangement, simple, oblong to lance-shaped, 1 to 3 inch long leaves, and these yellow golden flowers late spring, early summer into midsummer. Very, very gorgeous vine. I used to have it on an old bird feeder pole. Very, very pretty. Carolina jessamine, it doesn't really have a good smell, or at least I've never smelled a scent from it. But Carolina jessamine it's a pretty little native also. And I told you the vine section to be pretty quick. So here's my contact slide here, and let me go through the questions. Let's see. Yeah, some people use Madcap instead of Madcap Vibrant Cat. I just like adding in Catalpa also. I think it's interesting. Poison sumac depends on where you're at. So in our case in Virginia, poison sumac is not found in Northern Virginia. It's actually found more towards Williamsburg and Virginia Beach. So if you're in this like Culpeper part of Virginia or Northern Virginia, you will not see poison sumac. And poison sumac is actually not a vine, it is a full-size tree. So if you ever run into that plant, it is very large, not in our part of Virginia. Yes, the Buckeye. Yes, someone put that in the comments. It is peanut butter and chocolate. I thought chocolate was involved. Very pretty. It is Dr. Durr's book is called The Manual of Woody Landscape Plants by Michael A. Durr. The Manual of Woody Landscape Plants. And it's DIR. Yes, someone already put that in there. Catalpa sphinx moth. Yes, thank you for putting that in here too. Ginkgos are a very interesting tree species. Ginkgos are actually in the gymnosperm family. There's not a lot of deciduous family members, but it would be, I think it's in its own category. Unfortunately, I can't remember off the top of my head what term we would use for that. But it's a very, I love ginkgos. I have a ginkgo in my backyard. Very, very pretty tree. Yes, those terminology would be for other plants too, not just trees. Bushes, perennial plants, annuals. You could use those terms for those kind of plants too. Oh, Blandy, yeah, Blandy has a, if you don't know what we're referring to, Blandy Arboretum is the state arboretum of Virginia. It has a beautiful ginkgo grove, and I would think it would be getting very close, probably, to full color. Ginkgos have gold and yellow foliage, very, very beautiful. And yeah, just gorgeous. Yeah, black oaks and red oaks are kind of, they interbreed, so it's hard to see sometimes, but they do have very small acorns, as some red oaks do too, as we showed in the pictures. Yeah, black oak they interbreed with red oak so much, it's kind of hard to tell between them sometimes, but there's a lot of native black oaks around us too. Yes, the Osage orange at Montpelier, the female tree is right outside the formal garden. Yes, very pretty tree. Black walnut would actually be a true nut, just like hickory. And black walnuts are very closely related to hickory nuts and the pecans. Horse apples, that's so funny. I think I've heard that term before, but I haven't used it before. Yeah, X current versus D current are good terms to use. I usually use that in our pruning class. But thank you for putting that in the chat. That is very good to use. It would depend on the black oak species you're talking about. So, but they probably go more towards what the red oak looks like. So the connected ridge furrow system. Yeah, there's lots of different smooth bark trees. Certainly. Elephant bark. Yes, I have heard that many times used with beech. I love that description. Bark can change through its lifetime, certainly. White oak does that. White oak, maples do too. Red maple is actually a better example. When red maples are young, they have more smooth bark. And when they mature, they form more of a ridge furrow system. So a red maple is yes, they certainly change over time. Very interesting. Yes, Don redwood and bald cypress are very similar to eastern red cedar. Yes, that is true. Yeah, Virginia creeper and poison ivy will grow together. So it's very interesting to see. That's why I kind of stay away from both of them. They like growing together in the same spot. I have not read Dr. Durr's description of Trump vine in a while. I'll have to read that, see how funny it is. Yeah, Trump vine is gorgeous, but it will get out of hand fast, almost as bad as wisteria. So it will get out of hand. Yeah, crossvine should do fine in Maryland. It is definitely a native in our area. Wintertime walk identification, that was always an interesting one. You'll be looking mostly at buds and at bark during the winter time, unless it's evergreens. Evergreens, of course, are easier in the winter. You can look at the leaves still, but mostly you'll be focusing on bark and buds and bud scars and the other types of structures we talked about on the branches. So I actually prefer to have my walks in when the deciduous trees have leaves, because I think it's a little bit easier. But wintertime walks are very, very interesting. It's very interesting to see how many trees you can identify and practice at it with that. Yes, the recording will be sent out. Yep, it will. Everyone who registered will see the link, and hopefully it works. So we'll find out. Bird feeder poles. So I'm guessing the pole's probably not very large, not. Sometimes they're sturdy and sometimes they're not. I would probably go more towards the clematis in that case. Not autumn clematis, that thing is a monster. But a little clematis probably be cool. I used to have a Carolina jasmine on ours, but we used a large cedar post for our bird feeder. So it had a little more girth to it. But Carolina jasmine does look nice on a. And you're in North DC, so DC is a little bit warmer, so you have a little more um, examples or more selection than we do here. Native honeysuckle from a non-native, that's complicated. And I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I apologize at this time. Oh, Carolina jasmine. Northern Virginia, it might be a little less cold hardy. That's the only bad thing about it. But Carolina jasmine can grow in most of Virginia, certainly. I think Osage orange can have thorns, yes. But I can't say for certain right this second. Landy is open to the public 365 days of the year. Yes, it is. And it is, I guess the closest major city would be Winchester. It's a little bit outside of Winchester, Virginia. And that's the State Arboretum of Virginia. So if you type it in, it's called either type in the Google State Arboretum of Virginia, or it'll bring up Landy too as the name. But it's open to the public. It's free too. It's a free visit. So 20 years is not unheard of if you grew the hickory tree from a nut. 10 to 20 years, a lot of trees take a very, very long time to produce fruit, certainly. So that's not unheard of. Y'all are very welcome. I see lots of thank yous. I think we're going to have one more class. We've had classes all summer. I think we're going to have a transitioning into winter class, transitioning your landscape into winter class, probably in October. So y'all have all our information here. The most easiest way to find the flyer would be on our Facebook page. So the Virginia Cooperative Extension Culpeper page, Culpeper Facebook page should be the easiest place to find our flyers. I do not have the date settled on yet, but I think we're going to have one in October about that topic. I think I have an article about ginkgo I can share. I'll look through my notes and see if I can find one when I send out the PDF of the presentation. Tulip poplar is a very beautiful large tree. Yeah, thank you for sharing. 110 foot is very, very interesting. Yeah, chestnuts still are on the endangered extinct side of things in the US. There are a large number of breeding programs that are trying to make them a little more hardy. But yeah, chestnuts are still, it's a very sad story still. They're very on the way out still. So unfortunately. Yeah, we usually do this terminology in the first class, our normal years, I should say. I guess I could use that term. And then the next three, it's a 4-part series in September usually. So we do this presentation part, like you all have watched the past 2 Thursdays. And then we dive into actually walking around James Madison's Montpelier's property. So it is a very, very interesting class. We're outside for the last 3 sessions on a normal year. So if you didn't like this way of teaching quite as much, our regular tree identification class, I think you'll probably like that version a lot better. Unfortunately, we couldn't do it this year. Oh, you have a female ginkgo tree. Yeah, I don't know what kind of ginkgo I have either. I bought it as a seedling, so I'll find out if it's a female also. So the seeds of female ginkgo trees are very stinky. Yes, they certainly are, just like you said, unfortunately. Y'all are very, very welcome. To tell the story of trees, I like Dr. Durr's book, actually. I really like that. Um, um, Dr. Oh, his name is slipping me. I'll try to remember to send that book name in the email to y'all. Dr. Durr's book is amazing. I just really like that tree book. Um, Seeds of Fortune is it talks about more than just trees, but Seeds of Fortune is the title of a book, which I can't remember who the author is, but it talks about the plant explorers of the 1800s. It's a very, very interesting read also, Seeds of Fortune is. If you've never read that, that's a very interesting book. Ginkgo nuts are edible, yeah. The outside just stinks, so you have to get around that, but the ginkgo nuts are certainly edible. I'll send out a working link to the recording of the first class. Hopefully it'll be working. I need to look into that, why it didn't work tonight. One of y'all said, I forget exactly who said it in chat, but someone of y'all said it did work an hour ago, so I'll try to make sure that link is working when I send it out, the link to this one later. Oh, Katsura tree is beautiful. I love Katsura trees. Oh, ginkgo tree not turning yellow. I'm not quite sure what's wrong with your tree. That's very odd. Yeah, Sea Shepherd. Yes, that's the name that was slipping me. Seeds of Fortune is a very, very good book. I enjoyed that book. And I guess to finish it off, thank you all very much for attending. Look on our Facebook page for the next class. Excuse me. Like I said, I haven't set a date yet. Oh, magnolias. Yes, magnolias are very, very gorgeous trees. I have a magnolia in my front yard. That's the cultivar Little Gem. So little, and the gem is spelled Gem. Little Gem is a beautiful southern magnolia cultivar, which only grows about, or I'll find out eventually, but they say it only grows about 15 to 20 feet tall. And magnolias are absolutely gorgeous. Yes, we did not talk about that too much, but yeah, magnolias are gorgeous. The deciduous and the evergreen types. So like I was saying before, thank you all for attending. This picture here, the sculpture is actually up at the Museum of the Shenandoah Valley in Winchester, Virginia. And if you've never been there, they have a very nice garden. I took this picture of the sculpture. The sculptures, unfortunately, are not there all the time. It was a moving presentation of the sculptures, but this one was up there. The Museum of the Shenandoah Valley, I believe is the name. I don't think I got the name quite right, but that's a very, very beautiful site if you haven't been up there to Winchester, Virginia. And to sign off now, thanks again for coming to the presentation. Depends on whether or not how long it takes for the closed captioning to work through Virginia Tech. So look either for the presentation recording link tomorrow afternoon or on Monday. So I hope you all have a great weekend. Enjoy your evening. And again, thanks for attending. And you're welcome to send me any question. My contact information has been up on the screen for a little bit. And take care. Thanks again.